Hi everybody, welcome back to my craft room. This is my introduction for my newest cosplay project, which is Freya from God of War Ragnarok, specifically her Fatebreaker tunic. This outfit is very similar to her base game, but like a little more cleaned up. Red tunic instead of brown. She's a little bit happier. But yeah, I'm very excited to cosplay everybody's favorite, very, very sad mom. Freya is a competition piece. I am hoping to submit her to FanX 2025. So you're gonna see me taking a little bit more care with what I am working on and the techniques and materials I use. And like many cosplays, I am starting with the pants. And for the pants, I have already cut out the pattern, but I'm using this blue. It's a poly linen blend. I really like it. This came from Fabric Wholesale Direct. Since it's a blend of natural and synthetic fibers, it keeps the cost down and it's still like plenty breathable. I used this same fabric for my Aloy pants. I'm just gonna use the same pattern I drafted for my Aloy pants as well. So super easy. We'll just breeze on through the pants. So let's get started.
If you ever pattern anything for a cosplay, save your pattern. Not having to fiddle with drafting a whole new pattern saved me so much time. All I had to do for this one was make it a teeny bit longer than what I did for my Aloy pants. The pants have a gathered waistband for some nice volume in the legs. They look silly and they look even sillier after I added in some elastic to gather them at the calves and the knees. Don't worry, this will all come together later.
All right, pants. They're done, apart from like some decorative stitching and weathering, but I like to save that till the end so it's all cohesive. Now I'm gonna get started on the overskirt that goes over the pants. This is the fabric I'm using. I found it at a discount store. 2 yards of it were $7, which is great. Gotta save money where you can. I'm just gonna cut out the 3 separate skirt panels and then I'll show you kind of how I am gonna paint them up to make them look Norse. It's gonna look so Norse.
You feel so nice.
So nice! Oh, I've been on the internet for far too long.
I needed to figure out what my mystery discounted fabric is, so I did a burn test. I fully expected it to melt like polyester.
Is this a natural fiber? Wow. I think this is a natural fiber. Yeah, it ashed instead of melted. $7 for 2 yards. Still no idea what it is. Is this silk? Did I get silk?
I indeed got silk, which is an insane score. That does change the plan I had a little bit, but I started by draping the shapes I wanted on my mannequin. A long pointed piece in the back and 2 mostly symmetrical hip pieces. Then I cut it to make it look a little more tattered. Initially I was going to burn the edges to finish them, but I can't because again, bargain silk. So instead, I sewed about a 1/2 inch away from the edge using a matching thread. I pulled out the weft threads on the fabric so I would be left with this frayed edge. The straight stitch I sewed stops the fabric from fraying past that point, so it's not going to unravel into nothing. Freya has a Nordic knot-looking pattern on her skirt, so I found a stock image that looked close enough because there aren't really any clear enough reference pictures to match hers exactly. So as an experiment, I cut that pattern onto some regular old vinyl. And as always, weeding the vinyl was such a treat. So I got all my pieces that are nicely frayed now. I'm absolutely covered in fabric fibers. I have my little stencil. I don't know if this is gonna work because this is just regular vinyl. I don't think I'll have a problem with it sticking to the fabric. It's just getting the transfer paper off. So I don't know, we'll see. This vinyl was kind of intense to cut. It took probably a good 45 minutes to really cut all these things out. Also initially, I was just gonna burn the edges of this, but since I found out it's silk, I couldn't do that. And I think the frayed edges actually look a lot better, so that was a happy little accident. Eventually, I was able to apply my vinyl stencil to my fabric and slowly peel the transfer paper off. When I bought my cutter, it came with a bunch of vinyl samples, so I picked colors I didn't think I was gonna use. The vinyl actually went on so much better than I thought it would. So I have my 2 side pieces, and then I have my back piece. As you can see, I did my best to not like waste a lot of vinyl. So now I have to actually paint the pattern on, and to do that I am gonna use my airbrush. Normally I'm a tulip spray paint kind of girl, but I
want a little bit more control. I'm gonna use a light gray airbrush paint, mostly because I don't want the white to look like too stark. If it needs a little bit of white touch-ups later, I can always do that. Window is cracked. I got noise canceling headphones, because this is loud. Here we go.
The airbrush was not very fast, and my technique could probably use some work. But wow, did these lines turn out clean. This is some of the tidiest work I have ever done. I love it. Had I bought silk on purpose, I probably would have been too scared to do this, but the combo of the textured fabric and the clean paint lines is absolutely gorgeous. I wanted to make some holes in the skirt, so I sewed a circle in the middle of my fabric. It's hard to see because my thread match was frankly perfect. Forgive me for shoving my head in the way of the camera, but I cut some lines horizontally in the fabric and then just pulled the vertical threads out. This is the same way you distress jeans. And there you go, easy peasy hole.
The airbrushing is perfect. It's perfect. I also very much like the little distressed holes that I put in these. I think that looks really cool. And I think I will add a little bit of fabric glue to the back of these just to really make sure they aren't gonna fray. I have the stitching around them, but I really don't want them to fray. Eventually these are gonna get turned into the skirt, but I need to make the front part of the skirt first. And I am going to do a new technique that I have not done before, and that is working with veg tan leather. I haven't really done any leather working before, but this is veg tan leather. It's 3 to 4 gauge leather, if I recall correctly. I wanted it to be kind of thin so it can still kind of like flap around and not be too thick. I don't really need to wet form it to any shape, but I am going to tool it. And I have watched a lot of videos, so we're gonna see how that goes. We're doing all kinds of new stuff on Freya, which is good. I like doing new stuff. New stuff is good. Yeah, I took a chance, got some leather off of eBay. It was a little bit cheaper than it was in store in my area, so yeah. I guess I'll start by cutting out the shape I need, so yeah.
You may be wondering, Emily, why are you drawing directly on the leather and not making a paper pattern first? And really the answer is because this is just a triangle with chunks taken out of it, and it was really pretty hard to mess up. I just drew it on with chalk so I could adjust the lines super easily by just dusting it away. I'm going for dragon hide that Freya ripped apart because it stepped on her flower garden. I used a combination of leather scissors and an X-Acto knife to cut out my leather loincloth, and then I beveled my edges for a nice finished look.
I've been doing some practice pieces with my leather, and if you can see, I'm not incredible with leather tooling. So I had a thought. These are stamps. People use them for like Warhammer, Dungeons and Dragons, so they're 3D printed. I need my little front piece to kind of look like scales. These look scale-ish, so it's time for a small scale test. All right, veg tan. We give her a little spritz. Generous. Let that soak in. I have so much dirt on me. I have been in the garden. All right, that seems to be soaked in. Try this one on 1/2. Okay. Okay. It needs a lot of pressure and weight probably, but look at that. Little bit. Okay. Okay, we'll try the other one. A flagstone texture. I want to have both on there. If you give it a good. I don't want to break it, but hey! All right, that looks like it works. This is a proof of concept that is good enough for me to proceed.
So I'm going to show you all of this because the 3D printed stamps did not work like a traditional leather stamp, which like duh. It's plastic and there's a lot of flat and dull surface area. Weighing down the stamps with one of my heaviest objects, my nail polish collection, did not work. Nary a dent in the leather, so I was frustrated, so I just started throwing stuff at the wall. I got the leather super drenched in my bathtub.
Whoa, it's screaming a little. Okay, I've been experimenting because pressing the leather onto the 3D printed stamp not working. So I was like, hang on, what if we try it the opposite way? So I have my leather laid down on top of my stamp, and I have, this is maybe not the best tool, but I have the, I can't remember what this is called. You use it to smooth out the edges of the leather, and I'm just kind of pressing it like this. It's not a beveler, I can't remember what it is, but anyway, look at that! That's a way better texture, so figured it out. It looks so cool. Much more pebbly and scaly, so we're gonna do that. I cannot stress enough that this is not a real leather technique, but it worked, and that's all that matters. And I was able to just use what I had, which is great. Being a little scrappy is one of my favorite parts of cosplay. Once I got everything stamped in, it was time to dye it. I'm also, believe it or not, a novice leather dyer, but it turned out pretty good. I used some different browns, a yellow and a red, and just layered up the colors to make it look uneven and natural with my dye and the wool daubers. Once the dye was dry, I used some leather conditioner, and this made it come to life. Look how pronounced that texture is now. And don't worry, my edge beveler got to do its normal job of beveling edges. The loins are girded. I just did a really simple buckle attachment, so all of this is sewn to a waistband, my silk skirts, and my leather loincloth, and I am psyched about it so far. I think it looks really good. Not done yet. I need to make the coin skirt that goes on the front. For the coins, I have already 3D printed out about 10 of them. Then I drilled holes in my coin bases because I needed to be able to use jump rings to put them together. I got the 3D files off of Etsy, so I will link those below. They're fine, they were available. And instead of 3D printing out, I don't know, the 75 to 100 coins I think I need for this coin skirt, I am going to actually utilize the magic of resin casting. The layer lines on these coins really weren't too bad, so I did an extremely light coat of sandable primer because I really did not want to lose any detail in the coins. To get into all of those little nooks and crannies, I used a drywall sanding sponge to smooth out the primer. I printed out a little mold box to hold all my coins, and I used some double-sided tape to stick those little baddies down to the box. And now for some 2-part silicone. Silicone is kind of a mess, so I would suggest wearing gloves. The more proper way to do this is you measure your A and B parts into separate containers and then combine them in a third container, but for a small amount of silicone, I felt like I'd be fine just getting it all mixed up, and you do need to mix it up really well. The red and the white silicone, it looks like a little tasty treat. This is gonna make sense to a very particular demographic, but it looks like a tiger's blood rainbow float. It's ice cream and slushy. Here's me having one recently. Anyway, back to mold. I poured my silicone in a really thin stream to capture all of the details. Pouring from up high can also help reduce bubbles. Speaking of bubbles, I don't have a pressure pot, so I'm just giving it some taps and smacking it around a little bit to release any bubbles so they float to the top and pop. And about an hour later, it was time to demold and see how I did. And the answer is great. The mold turned out great. Here is where I goofed. I have an abundance of UV resin, and it doesn't work in an opaque mold.
Ugh, this is not working. It's not working at all.
It was a really gross mess, so don't use UV resin unless it's a clear mold. Lesson learned. I got some regular 2-part resin, which took longer, but there are no shortcuts, I suppose. I dusted my mold with some bronze and gold mica powder and then measured out my resin and hardener. I put my kitchen scale in a Ziploc bag so I could be really precise and also not ruin the scale that I use for food. Gold pops really well against black, so I dyed my resin black and mixed it really well and poured it slowly into my molds. They look underfilled here because they are. I was just trying to distribute the resin pretty evenly. Then I gave it a few thumps to get the bubbles to the surface and popped them with a lighter. These demolded so much better. I cast about 70 coins, and the resin said it took 12 hours to cure, but that was a lie, and it took 24, so you do the math on how long this took me to finish. The edges on a lot of these were pretty rough, so I trimmed off any really big chunks of resin and gave them a light sanding around the edges. And then just with use of the mold, the little holes that I drilled into my masters didn't quite make it to all of the final coins, so I just re-drilled all of those too.
I thought resin casting these was going to be faster than just 3D printing like 70 of them and priming and sanding them all. I was wrong. That took forever. I don't know. Me and resin, maybe not the best of friends. But now I can finally start assembling the coin skirt. So I have all of these finished. I have the holes drilled in all of them. And so now I just get to start attaching them together. So that should be fun. Me and the AliExpress pack of jump rings are about to become best friends.
I needed to attach a few coins to the top of the leather, so I picked out some of the frankly uglier ones and lined them up. Then I used some E6000 to glue the top row of coins down, and that artful zoom into me struggling to goop the glue out, that was just my camera mount slowly falling down. Also, I had a window cracked for all of this, and I left it overnight in my craft room with the door shut to dry. And then one by one, I attached all my resin coins together with jump rings hanging from the skirt. I used 2 sets of pliers to do this, and it did take a while, but it looks so stunning. The movement is great, and I made it so the coins won't flip around. Then to finish the skirt, all I needed was a little snap on the silk.
I am afraid. I'm wearing the lining that I have made for my Freya top. It's just gonna be a pretty simple wrap crossover top. But here is where I am nervous. I'm excited because I really like the material I got for the top. I got myself a lambskin hide. This also came from eBay, and I did have to get in a minor fight with the seller to actually get it. So I only have this much of it. I sincerely doubt if I run out, that seller will let me purchase from him again. It wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault. He didn't get back to me for 15 days. eBay's great. Anyway, so I'm definitely going to be doing like a secondary mock-up with, you know, the pattern pieces I make of this because I cannot screw this up. But it's gorge. Look at that shine. Oh, it's going to be so nice. But yeah, I have absolutely been putting this off because I am just simply scared. Normally I'm quite cavalier, perhaps willy-nilly, cutting into my fabric, my cosplay materials. Leather makes me a little more nervous, but it's gonna look so beautiful and I'm really excited, so wish me luck.
Before I chopped into my leather, I first drew some lines onto my mock-up so I would know where I wanted to put my top stitched lines on top. Then it was time. And honestly, it wasn't that scary. The nice thing about leather is it isn't a warp and weft situation because it's skin, so you don't have to worry about lining up all of your pattern pieces evenly. I traced out my patterns to the leather with chalk and ever so carefully cut them out and sewed them together. With apparel weight leather, you can sew it a lot like regular fabric, just use a leather needle. I also trimmed and sewed the seam allowance down since you can't really iron leather. I don't know, maybe you can. I was too afraid to try. I laid out my chopped up mock-up pieces and drew chalk lines for my top stitching to follow. I'm using this scallop stitch on my vintage machine because I just know this thing is going to handle the leather like an absolute champion. And I was correct. Look at that thing go. Every stitch it made was absolutely perfect.
I have my front pieces sewn together and top stitched. Bad news, I'm out of leather. The hide I ordered was not big enough for the back. But what I did get is a box of leather scraps from Facebook Marketplace, and I have this. So I'm going to cut out my pattern pieces and use some paint to see if I can get it a little bit closer. Luckily, you know, it's the back, and there's going to be a cape and stuff covering it, but of course. Actually, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you my leather box. Check this out. Ugh! It's 10 pounds. This came from a boat store that reupholsters the boats. So check Facebook Marketplace for leather. It's all over up on there.
I sewed up my bright red boat leather into the back side of the shirt and then took some Angelus leather paint and diluted it with a little bit of water. Then I just sponged it on with a brush. I did a lot of layers so it would stay flexible and sink more into the grain of the leather as opposed to really coloring it brown. And check out that color match. The texture is a little different, but again, it's the back. And then I traced out where I wanted my top stitches to go. For the top details, I got some bronze leather studs and measured about 1.5 inches along my top stitches. Then I just inserted the studs. A metal thimble really helped with bending in the little prongs, and I absolutely love them. They look so cool against the leather. And then I attached my lining to the leather shell. I took some more of my Marketplace leather scrap and cut out a long strip. Then I sewed scallop stitches along one edge of the strip. And then this was one of the more fiddly things I have done for a cosplay, and I have done a lot of fiddly things. This Foamworks punch was the exact size of the scallops, so I punched out the leather along the top stitched edge. An X-Acto knife helped get everything out pretty neatly, and I love how this looks. I painted the edges with more Angelus just to clean it up a little bit. I marked on my top where I wanted it to go and clipped it on almost like I was sewing on like bias tape, but very thick bias tape. I wanted to keep my stitches as invisible as possible, so I very painstakingly used a straight stitch and followed the scallops. This clip is in real time. It took forever. But I am a very patient person, and it turned out gorgeous. I just trimmed off the excess leather in the back. Oh, that was some of the fiddliest sewing I've ever done in my entire life. How to attach this, took me a couple days to think about and to marinate on, because I really was not sure how I was going to do it. I knew I wanted the decorative stitching, and I wasn't confident enough that I was going to be able to go over this decorative stitch with the vintage machine like the exact same. So I think this was a happy medium. I'm just kind of clipped into this now because now I have to think about an actual closure. I am super happy with how this came out though. This is great. It's not done. I don't even feel like it's close to being done, but I'm a lot farther than where I was. A very common way to do a leather attachment is a snap. And so I got myself a little snap kit. This is my test to make sure that I could snap. You can technically hammer in snaps. I hate hammering things in. If I can get a tool to make things easier, I pretty much always get the tool. I'm a tool girl. So my plan is to add a snap on the inside, snaps on the outside. So it'll look nice, not like you're gonna see this anyway, it's gonna be under a corset, but it'll look nice and it should be plenty secure. The snaps were super easy to install, just punched a hole and squeezed them in. I love trying out new closures because then I have that as an option in the future. Freya has an undershirt and I'm just making a panel instead of a full undershirt because if I made a full leather undershirt, I think I would roast to death and die. So I shoved some paper into my shirt to make a very rough pattern. Sometimes patterning is very complex and sometimes it's eyeballing. I traced it onto some black linen for a lining, and then don't call the leather police on me, but this is vinyl. I respect the hustle of using all leather, but I have this in my stash, and I like it. And I couldn't find any black leather on Facebook Marketplace that wasn't $150. I continued with the scallop motif on my panel by drawing out the lines and top stitching more scallops on. Then to finish it off, I hammered in some holes in my pleather and installed easy rivets into the scallops. Then I attached the lining and pleather together, and I bound the top edge with leather, but I ended up redoing this later because it was just too chunky. I didn't like it. But to attach the insert to the rest of the top, I just sewed on a few snaps. Then it was time for the sleeves. I made a quick sleeve pattern, and I had just enough of this gray leather in the box of scrap leather, so I traced my pattern onto it and cut it out. And now I'm excited to show you the embroidery box. During the pandemic, I got really into Brazilian embroidery, which is really cool. It's a 3D embroidery and it has like 6 different threads with different textures, and I have a ton of it and it's beautiful stuff. There's a couple of my old projects that are very cute, but I'm gonna incorporate this thread into Freya because it's just sitting here. I used a couple of different threads and essentially a whip stitch around the edges of the gray part of the sleeves. The sleeves have 2 layers, so I got out my black pleather again and made a quick pattern, and then again more scallops and more rivets. I also added the same linen lining I did on the top panel and bound the edges with some red faux suede. I ended up putting this on the top edge of the shirt panel too. It looks a lot nicer. I did more whip stitched embroidery thread, and then I used this neat boucle texture thread and used a couching stitch to run it along the edge of my bias binding. And they look good on a little test fit. Along the edges of the sleeve holes, I used my measuring tape to mark out every 1/2 inch. Then I used a punch to make holes in the leather along those marks. And then I threaded in some flat leather cord. And finally, I was able to sew on the sleeves. I sewed the sleeves onto the lining so there wouldn't be any visible stitching on the leather. My shirt, it's finally done. Oh man, this took me so much longer than I anticipated it would. Part of that is I've just been busy, but a lot more complicated construction than I anticipated. It's great. Half of it is gonna get covered in a corset, so that's cool. There is one thing left that I need to add to the shirt, and that is
this little gem. She's got a brooch, so I will show you how I made this now.
So the start of my gem was a little 3D printed master I got from the same file set as the coins, and it's pretty much the same procedure as the coins. I gave it some spray primer and sanded it super smooth before giving it a coat of glossy spray paint. This was to give the gem the best chance of being shiny right out of the mold. Then I put it in a mold box and made a mold out of my silicone. I love silicone. It's much nicer to work with than resin and less toxic. But once the mold was done, it was time to mix up some 2-part resin. I needed such a small amount that my kitchen scale couldn't pick it up, so I measured by volume instead and gave it a good mix. Then to make it beautiful, I added a sprinkle of bronze mica powder and some gold and rose gold leaf flakes. After that, it all got poured into the mold to cure.
So my little resin cast is finished. It looks so beautiful. I love it. You can barely see them now, but you could see them on the master that I cast. But there's some Norse runes just down here. Oh yeah, you can see that one okay. So I gotta paint those in. And usually, dice makers will use inks. I don't have any of those, and I don't really want to buy a whole thing of ink for one thing. So I will be using nail polish. I'm also gonna be using some nail polish on the back side because this is gonna go against a black background. And if I put it against a black background, do I have anything black? So we've got beautiful little gemstone with the light shining through the back. And then you put it against a black background. And it totally just sucks up a lot of the lovely reflectiveness of the gold leaf. So yeah, I have some very glittery, sparkly nail polish. You can also do this with silver contact paper. And you can see it's kind of flat on top, so I will show you how I fix that too.
I used a little detail brush and some black polish to carefully paint the runes onto the gem. Then to make the back of the brooch opaque and give it more glitz, I painted the back of it with more glitter nail polish. And unfortunately, my arch nemesis UV resin was the best option to get this gem nice and shiny and to lock those runes into place. I 3D printed the setting for the brooch, and you'll see more about how I did the 3D printed pieces in part 2 of my Freya video. I used some super glue to set the gem into the brooch. I had to pop a few of my rivets out to glue the brooch onto the shirt insert, but once I did that, I used some E6000 overnight to glue it together. I have found pleather plays really well with E6000 because it is plastic, you're gluing plastic to plastic, so it's one of those few instances where I trust glue.
Okay, it's time to do a try-on of everything I have so far. Pants. These look so goofy silly right now, but don't worry, I have a plan for that. Next is shirt. This is almost too fat for the microphone. Complete with sleeves that I love. Let me just kind of shove this in there. Not terribly elegant. Brooch looks good. And then I haven't decided if I'm going to wear this on top of the shirt or underneath it because there is going to be a corset over top. I haven't tried it on over yet, so we'll try it on over. It might be a little too thick over the leather shirt, honestly. Ah! Ta-da! This is what we got so far. Oh! This cosplay has been a very long process, which I anticipated it would be, because it's a competition build after all. But, man, I would say I'm about halfway through the actual outfit part of the cosplay. Originally, I was going to try and fit this entire build into one video. I don't know, I thought I would do that. It's just too many pieces, so it's gonna be a couple. Some of my standouts are the coin skirt. Learning how to work with leather has been really, really fun. I love the shirt a lot. So I'm hoping that I love everything else that I make. The next thing I'm gonna tackle is the corset, and that is something you are gonna see in the next video, which is hopefully gonna be out pretty soon. Having all of this on has honestly really gassed me up to really work on this project. Also, I got an application deadline, so I gotta get moving. So, thank you so much for watching. If you want to see the rest of my Freya build, make sure you subscribe to my channel. If you want to see what I'm working on right now, you can find me on Instagram. I'm also on TikTok. If you have any questions about the build, of course, leave them down below. And with that, I will see you next time where we're gonna keep working on Freya. Bye!